How to create a weave effect in Affinity Photo using the procedural texture filter. Create a new document, then go to the Layer menu and New Layer. You don't want an empty layer, so go to the Edit menu and Fill and set it to black and click Apply. I could apply the procedural texture effect using the Filter menu, but I'm not. I'm going to use the Layer menu. For more flexibility, go to the Layer menu, New Live Filter Layer, and Colours and Procedural Texture. The Procedural Texture panel will appear. Go to the top and you will see presets. Go down to the Waves. The Waves equation comes with Affinity Photo. I'm going to use that as the starting point for my equation. But instead of developing the equation all the way through the video, I'm just going to go straight to the equation. I've already created it earlier. For some odd reason, the equation doesn't always appear. Takes a few times for it to appear, especially if it's a long equation. I'm going to expand the panel so you can see the entire equation. Don't worry about copying it from the screen. I'm going to put it in the description so you can copy it from there. You can see, even though it's more complex, it is very similar to the waves equation. You will also need some custom inputs. You can use those via the 0, 1 and R, etc. at the bottom. Click the 0, 1 once and click the R 5 times. Set the B, C, D, E, F to something greater than 0. The left side and right side are very similar. There is a multiplier in the centre. That's very useful. You can create really amazing designs using that multiplier. I'm using a particular noise function, but you can use many other noise functions and there's quite a few available, about 25. Go to Help menu and Affinity Photo Help and bring up the Help. Go to the Filters section, Colours and Procedural Texture, and there's a whole list of noise functions. Use one of those noise functions instead. The RX and RY are great for repositioning the effect. In the original Waves equation, RX and RY are used. Instead, I'm using RY minus RX as well as RX minus RY. That creates diagonal designs. You could also use other functions, maybe square root of Rx instead. Here I'm using the harmonic oscsin function. You can find more functions like that in the Affinity Photo Help. Use those instead of the oscsin. Different functions will create more subtle effects. You'll notice there's quite a few constants in this equation. You could change them also to custom inputs so the 180 could be converted into G, H, etc. as well as converting those other values like -4 into a custom input. Be very useful as well. I haven't done that, but you could do that if you wish. The custom input A comes from the original equation waves. It is a very basic slider between 0 and 1. With all the additional functions as well as custom inputs, A becomes very, very useful. Set to 0 and it becomes straight lines, not waves. In the original wave equation, that was just 0.2. Now I've turned it into a B custom input. So instead of 0.2, you can now make it 5.2, 6.2, -3.2, etc. Changing B will vary the brightness. You can also set it to negative values. Instead of RX and RY on their own, I've got RX divided by a custom input. That makes even more flexibility for the equation. You can see by decreasing or increasing the custom input, the wave stretches in different directions. You can now experiment with the different custom inputs, so change them from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40, etc. and you can see the waves changing all kinds of ways. I've used the same custom inputs on both sides of that multiplier in the centre. You could of course vary the custom inputs so you could have I, J, K, L, etc. to create even more variation. Instead of just grayscale, you could make it a colourful effect. Use basically the same equation, but change the custom inputs to make it so for a red and a green and blue channels. You could also make the equation even longer. Just add additional multipliers. Maybe vary something like the harmonics, maybe some of the settings. So instead of 2, you could have 3, 4, 5, etc. multipliers in that equation. Create really extreme designs. Once you've settled on the custom inputs, the B, C, D, etc., you can just go back to the slider and just by changing that, you can create all kinds of designs, like a zigzag design instead of a wave function. It is a very flexible equation. Change the 180 to 90 or perhaps 45, or you could just use it as a custom input. Click the R at the bottom of the panel, change that 180 to G. I'm not sure if there's a limit to a number of custom inputs you can create. There may also be a limit to the size of the equation field. I'm not certain yet, I haven't found one, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. You can also split the equation field up with semicolons and also add variables into it as well. Many of the functions, such as oscsin, have additional parameters. You can vary those as well, and you can also make them custom inputs. By changing them, you can create all kinds of different effects. You can also add a 1 minus the entire equation to invert the effect. Creates very interesting designs that way. You can also add a multiplier in front of the noise function, so you can say like 10 times the noise. Create some interesting different waves. As mentioned before, there are many noise functions, so you can vary the noise. Instead of using the one that I've added, you can use a different one. The best source of information for all these functions is the Affinity Photo help, and there's a really long list of functions available. Unfortunately, the documentation doesn't really go into much detail about the functions themselves, as well as the parameters. You can also search the web for more information about the Perlin function, etc. You can now experiment. Just run through all the different settings. What would be really useful would be a random button, but sadly the panel does not include one. Go to the top right of the panel and there's a little menu there. Click on that and create a preset. Give it a name and a category. You can then continue to vary the preset. Once you're happy with everything, what you can do, just close the panel. The great thing about the live filter layer, you can always go back to it and change the settings at any point if you wish. Also, by adding this preset, you can then use it again and again and again. Go to the Layers panel. If you can't see that, that's via the View menu and Studio. And you can see the procedural texture is attached to the layer. Go to the Layer menu and New Live Filter Layer, and then Colours and Procedural Texture. The panel appears. Go to the top of the panel and select the preset you've just created. Change some of the settings for the panel. At the moment, you can only see the current weave design. You can't see the underlying design. To see both effects, just go to the blending modes. You can find that at the bottom of the panel. Select difference or darken, etc. Once you're happy with all your different settings as well as the blending mode, and you can experiment with that, you can close the panel. I made a mistake. I didn't select the layer before I started working on it. You can select the procedural texture layer and just drag it down into the existing layer. You should have a layer with 2 procedural live filter layers. If you wish, you can always change the settings again. Just double click on that little box at the side of the procedural texture name. Vary the settings again until you're happy. Once you're happy with that, click the close panel again. And you can repeat this at any point. You can, of course, add additional procedural texture layers. Just keep adding new live filter layers over and over again, and again varying the blending mode to combine them. Once you're happy with everything, you can always go to the Layer menu and use the Merge Visible. And then you won't be able to vary the settings, unfortunately. It is not the most colourful of designs, so you can always add some colour via a gradient or a pattern. So go to Layer menu and New Fill Layer. Go to the top left of the application and select Linear or Radial, etc. That adds a gradient to your design. Go to the Layers panel and the New Fill Layer and go to the blending modes for that and set it to difference or darken, etc. Go to the top left and click the colours that's next door to the type. You can then vary the colour stops for the gradient. Select a stop, go to the colour entry at the bottom panel, click that and change the colour. Once you've changed the colours of all the stops, what you can do, you can also vary the origin point as well as the length and the angle of the gradient. You can also add additional new fill layers, so you can add more than one gradient and blend them using blending modes. You can also change the gradient type to elliptical, etc. As mentioned, the description includes the equation, so just copy that and use it in your preset. Hope you found this tutorial of interest. Please subscribe to the Graphic Extras channel. I'm always adding new tutorials about Affinity Photo. Please also add a comment or two, as well as a dislike or like. Thank you much.